Well, no. A holy war, by strict definition, is a war that is based strictly upon religion, and it is a war that is carried out with the aim of converting others. That is not primarily what jihad is. Now, jihad in and of itself, it is a multivalent term. It has many different meanings, and it is used in the Quran in many different places for many different meanings. It does not necessarily entail fighting. In fact, the first time that the word Quran is the word jihad is used in the Quran is in the Meccan period, when there was no fighting, which clearly indicates that the word was not intended to mean fighting. The word, however, can and does connote fighting in the following context. And I think in order to understand this, we have to understand something about the pre-modern world. After World War II, in our own era, the nations of the world got together and decided that this war business is not a good thing for the world. And something very revolutionary happened, probably for the first time in human history. At that time, it was decided that all nations would recognize their neighbors in terms of the latter's right to exist in a state of peace, and that the assumed status of relations between one nation and another would be peace, and that those people who engaged in war would be violating the assumed agreed-upon status among neighbors. Prior to that time, the assumed status of nations was one of war. That is, in the medieval world, there was no such thing as an assumed state of peace. You were as safe as you were powerful. And if you were not powerful, and preemptively so, you were almost destined to be gobbled up by your neighbor. Jihad takes on its meaning in that context, and that Muslims are commanded to fight in order to preserve the integrity of the Muslim community in a world where the assumed status between nations is one of war. It is not for the purpose of converting the unbeliever, as it's put. It is not for the purpose of forcing Jews and Christians, for example, to become Muslims. Indeed, even when the Muslims undertake jihad, and nations that consist of Jews and Christians or Zoroastrians are conquered, they themselves are under no obligation to convert to Islam. In fact, a very famous jurist from Muslim Spain, a man by the name of Ibn Rushd, who was the grandfather of the very famous philosopher also known as Ibn Rushd, but who was famous in the West as Averroes. This Ibn Rushd said that when the borders of the Muslim community are rendered safe, and there are no threats from any outside aggressors against the integrity of the Muslim community, then there is no obligation upon the Muslim community to engage in jihad. So if the Muslims live in a world where the assumed status between nations is one of peace, Muslims can, should, and many would say must accept that status and not engage in wanton acts of aggression. But where the Muslims live in a world where the assumed state or status between nations is one of war, Muslims are under the obligation to conduct themselves in a manner that would safeguard the integrity of the Muslim community, including going to battle by the sword. And I'm going to add one other thing here, because this is something that's also commonly misunderstood today. Many people have made much of this distinction between the abode of peace and the abode of war. I don't know, you may have heard about this yourself. I'm sure you have.
Dar Al-Harb and
Dar-al-Salaam. And it is commonly said that the Muslims divided the world into Dar Al-Harb or Dar Al-Kufr, that is the abode of war or the abode of the infidel, and Dar Al-Salaam or Dar Al-Islam, that is the abode of peace, the abode of Islam. Well, in point of fact, the world itself divided into those denominations. And what the Muslims actually did was simply recognize a situation that was already present in the world. And when we want to understand the extent to which this is true, we should remind ourselves of the following. In the 10th century, in fact, all the way up until the 19th century, maybe even the early decades of the 20th century, you could be a Jew in Fez in Morocco, or in Cairo, or in Baghdad. You could be a Christian in Nigeria, or in Iraq, or in Syria. But you could not be a Muslim in Paris, in Liverpool, or in the Chesapeake Bay.
Now, another...
That is the situation that the Muslims recognize, that there are places on the planet where we cannot go and be Muslims.
Right.
This is the Dar Al-Harb.
But the United States, for example, does not conform to this terminology because...
Absolutely not.
Right.
Absolutely not.
So Muslims in the U.S. are not living in the abode of war.
Absolutely not.
Right. Well, the word infidel, which you use...
By the way, I just want to, because of course there's a lot of sort of Muslim political correctness going around today, and I want to make sure that people understand that this is just not my sort of politically correct opinion. The very authoritative work, probably one of the better works to read on this, is a work called Al-Kabir, the Great Compendium, by a man by the name of Al-Mawardi, who was a great Shafi'i jurist. And he has a very what shall I call it, extensive treatment of this whole business of Dar Al-Harb and Dar-al-Salaam. And what he says basically is that anywhere on the planet where the Muslims are basically able to sustain their status as Muslims, that is to offer their prayers, to fast Ramadan, to build mosques, and to uphold the lineaments of religion, that is Dar al-Islam.
Great. And now, the word infidel, what does it refer to?
Infidel has a sort of dual meaning. But I want to backtrack a minute and understand something about the whole concept of infidel. Because, you know, sometimes we have a tendency to transpose our own understandings onto other cultures. We think that a handshake means to the Chinese what a handshake means to Americans, when in point of fact it may mean something very, very different. Now, Islam believes itself or holds itself to be an absolute truth claim, just like Christianity, just like Judaism, and like other religions. And it holds that those who do not accept that ultimate truth claim are not believers from the perspective of Islam. And it holds that the majority, there are some marginal opinions that agree with this, but mainstream Islam disagrees with this, but mainstream Islam holds that those who do not accept that there is no God except God, and that Muhammad is the messenger of God, are unbelievers. Now, this speaks, however, only to their status with God in the hereafter. It says virtually nothing about their status as kind human beings, generous human beings, truthful human beings, who can be both accepted, respected, and even lauded for their good deeds in this life. There is no obligation on the Muslims to kill a person simply because they happen to be a non-Muslim. In fact, and this is something that I think has...
But that would also mean that if there's no obligation, but it does not mean that it's optional.
No, there's no permission.
Right.
I was going to make that point.
Yes.
And this is a part of the whole discussion that has been missing in our exchanges about this issue in America. And that is because we have held Islam to be the religion of a particular people in a particular part of the world. In point of fact, Muslims in America come from families. I'm a Muslim. My mother is a Christian. My brothers are Christian. The rest of my family is Christian. All right? Now, if you go to any standard book on Islamic law and you open up to chapter on, let's say, inheritance or treatment of parents, you will find that they refer to My mother, for example, would be the infidel mother. You can imagine that.
Yes.
And they don't shy away from using the term infidel. The word in Arabic is kafir. But they say the infidel mother must be treated well. If she has no means of her own, she must be taken to church. If she has no money, she must be given money by her Muslim son to spend on her holidays. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yes.
In other words, the term infidel or kafir refers to an individual's status with God on the day of judgment. It is not a statement as to any level of hostility inherent between that individual and Muslims in this life. Of course, there are other restrictions, marriage and things like that, that are matters of Islamic law, but there is no impediment to Muslims and non-Muslims coexisting as neighbors and even family members.